So goodness gracious, I know that another train will come by. So we will ask you for your own safety to move to the side of the platform and plug your ears, channel your 3-year-old and plug your ears. So, and usually it's only a problem when the train first comes by. After that it's not too bad, but when it first comes by, we need you to plug your ears. Okay, other than that, nobody's wearing any red or anything, so we're good. You're good. No, you're fine. It just, they don't want, us to look like spots.
Okay.
So that's good. This morning we're here to talk about a little bit about this dig, this archaeological dig, and this is being done as a result of the Alameda Corridor East project. I'm sure many of you are familiar with what that is. And what that is a lowering of the railroad tracks that are going to go into a trench, and that trench is going to reduce car and train connectivity. And it's also going to reduce noise, and it's going to reduce vibration. We're looking at this project being about 5 or 6 years. We're just in the beginning of it, and this is why we have this golden opportunity to do this archaeological dig. So it's kind of a bonus for our work to have John and his team here to do this dig. How many of you are native San Gabriel people? Many of you. So you will have a unique opportunity to see something that most people, most communities don't have, is to see your history up close. And John, you've been at 1800s, you found things from 1800s, so it's going back to 1800s, which is something that most communities don't get a chance to see. I usually give a long discussion to the kids and to people who come up on the platform regarding the history of the mission, and that the mission was 5 miles the other way near Montebello and Pico Rivera, but I think with this group that may be redundant. So today what we're going to do is we're going to focus more on the dig, and John will speak more on the dig and what we've been finding, and you'll have an opportunity to speak to him and ask him questions that are dig related. And also we have Mr. Adrian Morales, who is the Native American monitor. He is a native Gabrielino or Tonga, and he will be able to speak to you a little bit about the importance of this dig for his culture and why he is here monitoring the progress of this dig. We also have an opportunity to show you a few of the artifacts that have been found on site, and I think that's it. So I'll turn it over to John.
Okay, well, good morning and welcome everybody. This has been a long time coming, as you all know. I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for this kind of thing to happen for a long time. Now, usually with the school children, I start off with a question, and I imagine that most of you know the answer to this, but I ask them, where is the San Gabriel mission? And standing here facing this way, they all point over there, right? And the point I make is that that's only the mission church, that the mission was a town, and we're standing in the heart of the town. It was huge. We're standing in what was the mission garden, and garden's not a big enough word for it. It was more like a miniature farm. It had a little separate orchard section, and all kinds. They grew every manner of crop available, both native and European import. And one of the central fixtures of that garden towards the end of the mission's life in the 1820s was a mill called Chapman's Mill. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with that mill, or at least have heard of it, maybe have driven by and seen it in the bushes. It was visible in the street here for years. Well, so it was no mystery to us that it was here, but...
Upside. I can't see through here.
Get our attention.
So, within the mission landscape, we're standing in the middle of the garden. There was a building right there where we're going to walk in a moment called Chapman's Mill, finished around 1823, built by the first American to live in Los Angeles, a really colorful character, originally from Boston, was a shipwright when he was in Boston, so learned arts of engineering and carpentry, went to sea as a young man, as many people did in the early 1800s, was shanghaied by a French privateer, was picked up and forced into, that's the story way he tells it anyway, forced into a life of crime and piracy. Went to the Sandwich Islands, which we now call Hawaii, participated in a raid here on our coast in the Santa Barbara Channel area, was captured by a Spaniard on horseback with a lasso, which is fun, and thrown in prison. The Padres realized in talking to him that he wasn't just an average criminal. He actually had some engineering skills, which were in short supply here. They had labor all day long, but they had not too many skilled engineers and craftspeople. So they released him from prison on the condition that he would convert to Catholicism and help them build things. So he helped build the Plaza Church in downtown Los Angeles. He built a mill in San Inez, and then he built at least 2 mills here in San Gabriel. The one we're focusing on today is we call Chapman's Mill, but it's just one of his mills. It's his grain mill. And this was built to replace El Molino Viejo, which still stands today. El Molino Viejo was a failure, and it's kind of hard to tell because it's so pretty and it still stands. It was a technological failure. It got the grain wet. It was also too far away from the mission, so it was economically not very feasible. And shortly after it was built, they looked to replace it with something better. And this was a technological marvel of its age. Again, not easy to tell that with just a few stones, but this man Chapman brought with him the entire Industrial Revolution. Inherited from England, brought to the east coast of America. New Englanders were building mills with complex gearing, with machinery that was unknown to the Spanish on the edges of the frontier here. So he brought that, had a vertical upright wheel gearing system that transferred that vertical motion to horizontal to grind the grain. It had adjustable mill wheels that were able to grind both large and small grain, and all of that was housed right here in the street. Most of it was destroyed in 1941 when they put in this subdivision, but one corner of it remains, and the biggest thing that remains is part of the mill race. Now, the mill race is the waterway that powered the mill. It ultimately channeled water from way up at La Presa Dam and from over at El Molino Viejo. There are springs there that had water coming out. They channelized those springs, forced the water downhill to turn the big mill wheel and grind the grain. And so the largest remaining segment is right behind you here, where the archaeologists are excavating. From here it went directly across the street and then took a left-hand turn around the mission. We did some ground penetrating radar study a few weeks ago and see what I think are faint traces of it remaining, but there's no large segment of it over there that I could tell. There's been a lot of construction over there over the years, so really the best remaining segment of it is here. When the railroad went through in 1874, the Southern Pacific, they cut the mill race in half, which was an act of destruction that ironically ended up preserving the mill race. Now the area was not developed afterwards, and it has just sat here covered with dirt all these years. So the plan for us is to excavate it, to collect the artifacts, to learn about how it was engineered and that sort of thing, but ultimately to pick it up and preserve it and keep it right here in the community. One of the most common questions I get from folks like you who live nearby is what do we get to do with these things? This is our history, we want to keep it here. And I sympathize with that very much. Some of the research materials are going to end up at UCLA, available to researchers, but some of the materials are going to remain right here in the community. But most importantly, the highlight is this big construction here, which I think tells us so much about the history of California, and it's going to stay right here in the community. So that's this. So we knew about this. I don't know if any of you attended the lecture that I did back in 2009 for the association. That was really well received, and we've known about this mill race for years, like I said. We found another wall at the far end. You can see another cluster of people working over there. And when we originally found it, we thought this is the wall of the garden. It kind of lined up. The maps aren't great from back then, but it kind of lined up to where those maps are. Once we started opening up bigger excavations earlier this year and late last year, we found out that the wall's far too big to be a garden wall. The garden wall you'd expect to be long and narrow. It's not holding up any weight. This thing is more than 3 feet wide. Really well constructed. Whoa. And wait a minute, there's another one right next to it. 2 big parallel walls. That tells us it was a building. The size and construction of the walls, and you can see kind of melt coming off the sides, tells us that it was an adobe building that had a flat roof probably and tarred roof. So you get some roof tar, some plaster, and some adobe melting on the sides. We don't know its function yet. It doesn't appear on early maps. It's not talked about in the literature that I've come up with yet, so perhaps some of you folks know something that I don't. I definitely appreciate tips from knowledgeable people in the community. But it's clearly a large building, large, narrow, more or less north-south alignment. We've excavated a trench across the center of it, and you can see both walls really nicely. No sign of a floor yet. We had a piece of Asian porcelain come up from underneath one of the walls, which helps us date the wall. So we're thinking it's pre-1810. So it's mission period, but exactly how old and exactly what it was used for, we don't yet know. But fortunately, I've got a couple more months to excavate and figure that out. So that's one of the big surprises and big mysteries that we're still chasing here. So with that, I'd love to introduce Adrian Morales, and then we can answer questions. Adrian?
Guys, welcome to Gabriel Archeological. My name is Adrian Morales. I'm a travel consultant and travel.
Speak a little louder. We're having difficulty hearing you.
Okay, my name is Adrian Morales. I'm a travel cultural resource consultant and an enrolled member of the Gabriel Archeological Saginaw Band of Mission Indians. My duty here is to oversee the data recovery process here, and it's pretty much to protect the resources and mitigate any kind of cultural resources that may relate to our culture. The information that we gather from the digs are real important to our tribe. We use it for educational purposes. So yeah, like I said, my job here is to mitigate any cultural items that relate to our culture, basically.
Adrian has a very interesting story. You want to tell me a story about the children?
Oh yes, children's story. The children's story, it goes. The children's story goes like this. The tribal people were afraid that our culture, that our history was one day going to be extinct. So the tribal people gathered in the village, and the chief of the village was asking for suggestions. How can we preserve our culture, our history? And the people were raising their hands with different suggestions. Well, let's hide it under a rock, and maybe it'll be preserved and it'll stay there. Or let's hide it in a tree, and just keep it far away so that we can always go back and we'll know where it's at. Or let's dig a hole and just keep it in the hole. And the elderly lady said, no, chief. What we're going to do with our culture is we're going to put it on our children. We're going to teach our children to pass the culture and the history. So we're going to hide our knowledge and all our history and all our culture in the children, because the children are the ones that are going to grow up and continue passing the culture on to their children, and they're on and they're on. So that's how we end our story, because it's true, because the children will keep our culture alive and protect our history.
You know, that's so true, because my mother, Miss B. Alva, who passed away at 97, her grandmother was a Mission Indian, Gabrielino, and she raised us that way, that we were to educate. She educated us as much as she could with her knowledge of her Indian background from here through her mother, and what her mother told her of her mother, and so she would pass it down all the way down to our babies, who learned a little song, which we don't know the words of, but it's to this day, you know, as we do, as in our homes too, the history of our Gabrielino bloodline, and I'm like 6th generation of the San Gabriel Mission District.